Hello, in the last video, we talked about good stabilization, poor stabilization, and natural turquoise, what the differences are and what that might mean when you're making pieces of jewelry. Today, we're going to take the poor stabilization from that video. I cut it and polished it in a side profile view, and we're going to see if we could still make something worthwhile. I want to know at the end of this video if you would agree that this is a worthwhile piece of jewelry. So let's get into it. Right now, we've traced and now we're cutting out the back plate, which is going to hold the stone. You can see here I'm using shears to cut this sterling silver. In instances like this, I find the shears to be very fast and efficient. I like using them. A lot of people like to use a saw blade. The saw blade is amazing for getting extremely detailed cuts, but we're just cutting out a profile. We don't need that. We'll clean up the top a little bit, and then we can move on to the next step. One thing to note as we get this project underway, feedback is so important, especially when we are experimenting. I mean, if we can get someone who says whether they like it or not and why, specifically why they like it or not, that is an extremely valuable amount of information. Now I'm gonna melt some silver balls that will stamp into little stones for our riverbed. This piece, we're gonna use the turquoise as a river mosaic with a little riverbed and a fish in the silver. I'm using a charcoal block here. It really, once you get a little indent in there, it holds the heat really well. You can make any little ball of silver or just melt your scrap into ingots or anything you need. It's really simple, really easy. Now we flatten it on a little anvil. You can see it there attached to the hammer. There's our stones. That's gonna go on the top along the little riverbed. There's our fish stamp. I'm using a 24 gauge sterling silver plate for this. That way we can get a clean stamp indent. I want it to be a thick enough silver that I guarantee a good clean layer for this. You can see it there. I think it indented well. So this is how our turquoise will sit. Kind of like a river flowing of blue. Here's our fish stamp. You can see there on the little image where I'm gonna put it, what style it's gonna be in. We have all of our stones. The nice thing about making these stones by hand hammering is none of them are exact or perfect, and that really adds to the authenticity of this piece, because the whole point of this piece is to have it be very natural and just free-flowing. And that's what we're going to make it look like. So I'm using graphite here. This is just a pencil. It's going to make it so that if I indent all of the image with the graphite pencil, when I solder this to the main silver plate, we're not going to have solder bleed onto the top surface, because solder would easily want to flow to the top surface of the fish and fill in every single bit of the gaps. We don't want that. It would completely ruin the image. We're doing the same with our stones. Just the tops, little graphite. That way the solder won't flow over them like a mound. We want it to just be underneath holding them. I'm creating a graphite barrier here. This will simply do the same as what I did on the images. I don't want any of the solder to flow in a direction away from my pieces I want it to hold down. In small quantities, silver solder will do exactly what you want it to. In large quantities, it'll often turn into blobs or flow into spaces you don't need it in or don't want it in. So you have to watch that. You have to really be precise on what you're setting it. I've taken a small brush and I've brushed on flux underneath each of these little pieces I'm putting. And I've brushed flux onto the specific surface area that I want to work. I have little bits of solder, and this is a hard solder, so it melts at a higher temperature than like a medium or easy solder. Now I'm going to pass the torch over the surface I'm wanting to work. The reason I'm passing it over first is I needed to ramp the heat up over time to get it where I need it. If I just went full blast right on the direct spot that I'm going to heat, it would potentially melt the small pieces before the back plate is even hot enough for the two pieces of solder to bond as one piece. Now we have it in the pickle, we're going to pull it out. Put it in some water to neutralize the acid. Now this is an 18 gauge wire. We're going to use these as our prongs to set the stone. We're going to have an open face stone. So instead of a bezel all the way around it, we're going to showcase the natural edge completely around the stone. We'll knock a 45-degree angle into this. The 45, we can bond it to the back plate, and the prongs will sit up over the stone, where we can use them to set. Clean it up on the underside, flatten it out with a little bit of a filing here. Now I'm marking my spots on the piece where I'm going to need to drill the prong sets. Although a Dremel or flex shaft is very fast and efficient, I like to use a palm drill for small holes like this. It allows me to maneuver well, and it's very small and versatile. How it works is I apply pressure with my palm and the handle rotates around it. Once I got my hole started, I just drill through. And there we go. The drilling left a bit of a burr on the back side of the plate, so I'll have to clean that up before we move on. Just a little bit of hand filing and it should take care of it. Now there's an example of how the prongs will sit. Put a little bit of flux on these. We line up the prong where we need it. Now we're moving on to a medium solder. That way it will melt long before any harder soldered areas will melt. I use a titanium pick because the titanium will not melt or bond to any of the silver. That way I can move or change things while they're heating. And now we're ready for the next step. I'll take this sanding disc on my flex shaft. We're gonna clean it up a little bit. You can already tell how everything is going to look towards the end, how it's gonna sit. I'll have to straighten some of these prongs. The back plate has a little bit of a warp in it, we'll take out. All of this stuff is pretty easy to do. I can use a rawhide mallet to fix the back plate. We make sure to set a stamp. It is always important to stamp your pieces. Even little experimental pieces like this. What metal is it? What's your name? Some people also like to stamp in specifically a logo. This is called a cup burr. It's for rounding the tops of prong settings. It has a bunch of teeth on the inside, and the varying sizes will do different sized prongs. Always make sure you lubricate it when you use the cutting. If you overheat it, it'll eat up the burrs and you won't be able to use them anymore. So we just go and we clean up each of these. Nice and round, no more sharp edges. Now it's time to add our loops and set up for a chain. We'll set rings onto the back plate like this. And these other rings will loop through those. That way it holds the necklace nice and evenly. Now we're moving on to an easy solder. We want the solder to melt far before the others. That way the silver pieces bond really well without damaging any other parts of the structure. This one's moving a little bit on us. We'll take the titanium pick and just hold it down so it bonds properly. And there we go. The molten solder tends to run into small gaps and spaces, follow the heat of your torch, and obviously follow gravity. There we go, those bonded nicely. Now we're placing the rings. We need to be precise with our heat here. I'm using the titanium pick to place the solder. That way we don't miss and bond something unneeded, because these rings need to be able to move freely. So all we're doing is closing the rings. There we go, those closed up nicely. let's throw everything in the pickle. The acid solution eats away any of the fire scale or buildup from the process. We'll neutralize it in water, and then we'll dry it off and continue working. We're getting there. We don't have much further to go. We're gonna polish, clean it up, and then we can set everything. But first, we'll use liver of sulfur to patina some definition into all of that detail. We paint it into all the surface. We want to have that dark detail underneath. When we polish, it'll really pop. Especially pieces like the fish. Without this, the fish looks kind of washed out and very white because it's all just bright silver. And with this, the finer little details on the fish are really going to stand out. It'll be really nice. Here's a 2-hour time lapse so we can watch the sulfur darken the silver. Heat will directly affect the speed of this process. Now I'm ready for the polish, and we'll see that detail pop. I'll start with a 400 grit bristle disc. This will slightly round any rough edges. It's going to remove the outer patina so we can keep the lower definition, and it's going to be what starts our initial polish. I'll use it all over the piece, cleaning up everything. We don't want any hard edges that'll catch when anyone wears this. We don't want any rough or abrasive parts that feel uncomfortable to touch your skin or that might grab on clothes or anything of the sort. Polishing is one of the longest processes in jewelry making. I often don't cut this out of the video, I just speed it up highly. The main reason is it's somewhat satisfying to see everything come together. Like watching the outer frosty layer get polished away and it become nice silvery sheen is pretty pleasant. And it's good to see the whole process. A lot of people will skip this. A lot of people will make their video shorter by just cutting out all of this, trimming the fat as it were, but it adds to the authenticity. Now this purple bristle disc, this is a 600 grit. This one will very, very lightly break edges or round rough pieces, but this is where we're really gonna start getting a polish out of. Make sure I thoroughly hit everywhere that our stones and fish are. Depending on the direction you're facing, when you polish this, you'll see lines in varying directions, but they are small enough that the next wheel will pull them out. Going step by step through the grits on this will definitely give you a nice even polish. If you skip grits just to get that mirror finish early, you might have deep gouges or scratches in the piece at the end. It is worth taking your time. Now we're on to the 1000 grit. I like using bristle discs because when you're doing polishing traditionally with compounds, There's a lot of mess involved and a lot of cleanup involved, and when needed, it's definitely worth doing. But on pieces like this, having less of a cleanup, especially if your workspace is smaller or you don't have a space that you can afford to get dirty, this will make a big difference. And now we move on to the 2000 grit. I've stacked up these bristle discs. This is more of a final polish before we put it in the tumbler. Stacking these makes them polish very quickly, but it also makes them prone to grabbing things. If you were to hit one of these prongs dead on with this, it might grab the whole necklace pendant and throw it across the room. So you gotta be careful. But the multi-discs, all of them hitting it at once, they can really shine it up really nicely. And 2000 grit is an adequate polish. You could end it here with this. But putting a piece like this in the tumbler is going to work harden the surface, and it's going to buffer out and shine absolutely every inch of this, which is inevitably very much worth it. So let's put it in the tumbler. There's stainless steel birdshot, silver flake, and a little bit of dish soap in water. The dish soap acts as a lubrication to keep the piece from abrasing against any of the birdshot. And there we go. That's a nice clean polish. Now we can work on setting the stone and finishing it up. So turquoise is a softer stone, so I'm using this smooth set bezel setter instead of a stainless steel or brass prong setter. I will use one of those once I have it in place, but if you were to slip on that and hit the stone, you could potentially gouge it, which would look really defeating after all the time and effort we put into this piece. See, this is a stainless steel prong setter. If I need to get a prong where it goes, this will definitely do the trick. It uses the force of my palm against the prong. Works great, just don't miss. And I continue with my softer bezel set. Now the goal here, this is an experimental piece. Like I said in my last video, this is a stabilized Royston turquoise, and I want you to tell me how it turned out. I personally enjoy making pieces like this, and please leave in the comments whether you like it, hate it, and why. If you made it this far in the video, thank you. I appreciate your time. Feel free to subscribe or, check out any of my other videos. I don't have a lot yet, but I plan on making more builds like this. I like doing the experimental builds. I'll also do some tutorials on some of the basic builds that are common that people really like when you go to jewelry shows or trade events. Yeah, I mean, making jewelry, it's a ton of fun. Metallurgy as a whole is a lot of fun. I love doing the jewelry. I love blacksmithing. Anything involving molten metal, I just think is so cool. And I love to do it. And I plan on doing a lot more here over time. So hopefully people like this and I can continue to keep making these videos because I plan to do a lot of them over time. My schedule is very packed, but once I can, I make a video, and hopefully they'll be coming out more often than they do now. But for now, I hope you have a wonderful day and thank you.